Eli Drinkwitz is currently the big man on the Mizzou campus, but let's not forget that we probably wouldn't have gotten to this point without Barry Odom. I want to explain why and why that 2020 class is one of the most crucial in Mizzou history right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and a man who promises to be here until Friday this week after taking a little bit of time off last week. Happy to be back here with you in the saddle at the Locked On Mizzou podcast. Of course, I want to talk about USA Today. At least one writer ranking Missouri rather low, in my opinion. 21st in the country. Let's examine that coming up in just a little bit. But first, let me tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And one thing I've noticed over the years, observing not only football, but just human nature in general, is that over time, nuance gets really lost. And I can already tell where this is heading. If Missouri football continues its upward trajectory, hopefully the Tigers have an incredible 2024 after a great 2023. And if that all happens, continues for a few years, all that good stuff, well, I can already see it coming. In a decade or so, maybe even less than that, the narrative will become that Eli Drinkwitz was a genius and Barry Odom was an idiot. And I'm just telling you, that is not the case at all. And I'm being a little hyperbolic there to prove a point, for sure. But broadly, I think you suspect that I'm right. And the reality is Barry Odom, you look at this Missouri squad on paper the last couple seasons, the reality is Odom deserves a ton of credit for last year's squad and some for this year's squad too, coming up. And if you look at the 2020 recruiting class, for example, let's revisit that for just a little bit. That's an interesting class because in a way, that was Barry Odom's last class, while at the same time being Eli Drinkwitz's first class. Really, the best thing Drinkwitz did in 2020 was be able to retain most of the guys that Barry Odom had previously recruited, including none other than our starting quarterback, Brady Cook. I'd say that was a pretty important grab there. Now, you might be saying, hey, Brady Cook was a true son type of guy, kind of grew up as a huge Missouri fan, wanted to be the Missouri starting quarterback, dream come true, that type of deal. So maybe he would have signed with Missouri regardless of who was the coach. But it's also not guaranteed that Drinkwitz or any other Missouri coach would have offered Cook that scholarship very early in the process. So to me, Barry Odom deserves a tremendous amount of credit for finding Missouri's starting quarterback. One of the best Missouri starting quarterbacks, I think, when it's all said and done, one of the best that there will ever be. I'm not saying he's better than pitching Paul Christman or Chase Daniel or Brad Smith necessarily, but man, Brady Cook, you never know too. Who knows what this 2024 season is going to look like? And actually, The Athletic went back and did a retrospective on the 2020 recruiting class for the country. So just to put it in context for you, well, they re-ranked these classes, and frankly, this class, the re-ranked look a lot similar to the original rankings, with one very notable exception. You've got Georgia, number one. Shocking, right? Georgia seems to be number one before these guys ever step on the field. So for them to be retrospect number one, not a huge shock there. Then you got Alabama, of course, Michigan, your defending national champions, Ohio State, and then at number 5, your Missouri Tigers. That is no small feat, ladies and gentlemen. Again, Barry Odom, I think, as time goes along here, people are just going to forget that he was a big part of establishing this program. Now, don't get me wrong here. Barry Odom was fired, and probably fired for a good reason. I think ultimately the biggest downfall Barry Odom had is that he couldn't get along with his boss, Jim Sturk, at the time. What exactly was behind all of that? I truly do not know. That would be all speculation and passing on rumor and innuendo on my part. No real point to do that at this point in time. My point is, though, while Odom had his downfalls, and hopefully he's learned from that at his next stop here at UNLV, that type of thing, and also, hiring Derek Dooley was maybe his downfall as well. But again, Eli Drinkwitz not perfect with coordinator hires either, despite some recent success there. My point is, Odom did a great job not only recruiting Brady Cook, but also guys like Kris Abrams-Draine, starting Missouri cornerback. You're also talking about even transfer guys like Michael Maietti, Kiki Chisholm, Damon Hazelton, some guys that really came in and were productive players very early for Missouri. And, well, for Eli Drinkwitz, to his credit, not only did Missouri get Kris Abrams-Draine in that cycle, but the big win for 2020, of course, was Ennis Rakestraw for Missouri, and Eli Drinkwitz being able to pull him in over Alabama and Texas late in that class. Obviously, Drinkwitz deserves huge credit for that as well. So basically what I'm saying is Drinkwitz and Odom deserve credit for that 2020 class that is, again, in retrospect, the fifth best class in the entire country, according to The Athletic. The bottom line is, no matter what percentage of credit you want to dole out to Odom or Drinkwitz, the bottom line is they both deserve some credit. And regardless, without that 2020 class, a class that resulted in multiple important, crucial starters for the Missouri football program, in particular in 2023, a huge breakout season. Well, without that class, who knows where Missouri is right now? In fact, it's not wild to think that if that class didn't work out, you don't get the right quarterback in Brady Cook, for example, it's not impossible to imagine a world where Missouri goes 500 or something again, and you're looking at 4 straight years of basically 500 football for Eli Drinkwitz. Well, it's not hard to imagine. Well, people are questioning if he should still be around at that point. That's how many years Barry Odom got in retrospect, by the way, was that same 4 years. So, again, the 2023 season could not have been more crucial and critically important, as Gary Pinkel used to say, for the future of Missouri football. And without it, Barry Odom and what he did in 2020, I'm not sure any of it happens. And when it comes to the 2024 season, just about 3 months away here now, as I speak, that seems like tomorrow. I know to some of you, that seems like, oh God, 3 months. When I was 20 years old or so, that's what it felt like to me. Well, now in my older days, I don't know, 3 months, especially when you've got young children, seems like that's going to come up next week to me. So I'm not exactly wishing my life away this summer whatsoever. But obviously I'm looking forward to Mizzou football this fall. When it comes to 2024, it seems like the nation is pretty confident in the Tigers. But, it takes a lot these days to actually insult a Missouri fan. So Paul Meyerberg over at USA Today has the Tigers ranked 21st. Oh my God, what in the hell is going on here? Well, let's take on Paul Meyerberg and his take and show why I think, to me, this is an example of old thinking by a relatively young man here at USA Today. So let's talk about the Tigers, to me, being underranked there at 21 coming up here in just a little bit. But first, as a golfer for years, when I turn on the PGA, I've heard PXG say nobody makes golf clubs like they do, period. And you know what? I'm a believer now. After taking in PXG Kansas City last week, I tell you, Jacob had me perfectly fit for a new PXG Black Ops driver. It's a total game changer. You no longer have to sacrifice distance for forgiveness. And I'm just telling you from firsthand experience, I got my hand on that new PXG Black Ops driver. The thing is just absolutely solid. It just feels great off the face, incredibly forgiving. But yeah, the pop is absolutely there. You can feel that too. And just beautifully manufactured clubs as well. Jacob did a great job of getting me dialed in. I just banged a bunch of drivers around at their store for about an hour on their state-of-the-art TrackMan technologies. Hey, this one was maybe a little hot. Okay, let's dial it in a little bit. Jacob knew exactly what kind of head I needed, what kind of shaft, the entire deal. So you know what? PXG truly made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. You got to get fitted clubs. They're really a game changer. So visit pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. It's at 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen free golf balls. That's pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And it is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, or even Heisman Trophy odds. I have to confess, I'm still a little bit surprised that Luther Burden is still sitting there at 100-1 to win the Heisman Trophy. I realize wide receivers don't often win that award, but it certainly has happened before too. I just think at 100-1, that's a pretty decent value for Luther Burden. But regardless of what you're into, you got to visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count. It's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So Paul Meyerberg over at USA Today, God bless him, ranking all FBS teams from 1 to 134, and with the addition of Kennesaw State, this upcoming season there are indeed 134 FBS teams in that division. So God bless Paul Meyerberg for even undertaking that type of deal, because yeah, for one man, that is quite an undertaking. But regardless, I thought it was interesting that Meyerberg here has Missouri ranked 21st in the country, which with all of Missouri's returning production, especially on offense, off of a team that went 11-2 last season, that's a pretty shockingly low ranking to me, especially when you see that he has the Clemson Tigers 9th in the country. To me, this is just a little bit of an example of old thinking, in my humble opinion. I can see where somebody would think, okay, Missouri in 2022, well, a lot of those close game scenarios obviously went wrong for the Tigers that season. Well, last season in 23, a lot of things went right for Missouri, including the 4th and 17, the 61-yard field goal, all that stuff. I'm not going to recap the entire season for all you true sons and daughters out there. You certainly remember it. But the point is, you can see an argument for, okay, maybe there's a little bit of in between there. Missouri drops back to earth a little bit, goes, say, 9-3, and maybe that's relatively close to 21st in the country. That's not insane. That's not an insane idea. To me, though, I just think the teams that he ranks ahead of Missouri, though, that's the tough part for me. You see, you got Iowa, 18th in the country, for example. I'm sorry, an Iowa team that basically could not score an offensive touchdown last season. You're going to give that squad the benefit of the doubt over a Missouri team with basically all of its offensive production returning for all intents and purposes other than the running back spot, right? To me, that's just a bizarre assumption there, and a bunch of bizarre assumptions in these rankings here. But the bottom line here is there is a scenario where Missouri is 21st in the country, no question about that. and the thing is with Missouri's schedule, of course, it isn't by SEC standards, not the toughest schedule. But again, by FBS standards, as I pointed out last week, it's still easily an above average schedule. So Travis on YouTube, for example, gave me this comment. The truth is, if any team in the SEC doesn't make it to the college football playoff with a 10-2 record, it's going to be Mizzou. That schedule has embarrassing midseason games on it. Boston College, UMass, really? It reads like a team that doesn't expect to be good and scheduled bad teams to try to get a bowl game. We can't do this in the future. We need to schedule at least one competitive game out of conference. Well, some of that I agree with and some I don't. And on the idea that if any SEC team doesn't make it with a 10-2 record, it's going to be Missouri. Well, actually, that's probably an accurate statement. But here's the thing. You said if any team in the SEC with a 10-2 record doesn't make it, sure, if you're going to pick one team, it would be the team in Missouri that on paper has the easiest, again, easiest being relative, the easiest schedule in the SEC for this coming season. But here's the deal. At 10-2, I still think Missouri gets in. I think the likelihood of that happening is maybe 10%, something like that. I just don't see a lot of scenarios where a 10-2 Missouri or any team in the Southeastern Conference does not make the 12-team playoff. Because, again, for all the talk by myself, of course, about the relatively easy schedule Missouri has this season, well, of course, that's all on paper. Oklahoma could be better than we expect, for example. South Carolina, Auburn, you name it. And, of course, some of these teams could be worse than we expect, too. All of this is just projections and statistics and frankly, just speculation by people like me as we sit here on May 29th. Obviously, Missouri's schedule could look a lot different at the end of November. We'll just have to see. And now to the idea that Missouri's schedule is not as strong as it should be and what we should do in the future, that kind of stuff. Well, especially the idea of scheduling games literally a decade or more out, as Missouri did in this UMass situation, I believe, this Boston College situation as well. Frankly, I enjoyed my trip to Boston 3 seasons ago in 2021, despite the heartbreaking ending for the Tigers. So it's not as though, hey, Boston College, not a big-time, blue blood football program, but they're not exactly a joke either. That was an interesting trip to take. And, at the time Missouri scheduled that game, it's not as though you knew Boston College was going to be an ACC doormat. But that's kind of the problem. You schedule these games a decade or more out, you're not even really sure how good these programs are going to be, of course. My goodness, a decade can change so much. I mean, just so much has changed in the last 2-3 years in college football alone. So to the idea that we should try to schedule at least one competitive out-of-conference game, I think that is sort of the idea that Missouri has had. Let's play Kansas State. Let's play Boston College, who is an ACC team. Let's play Purdue. Let's play Kansas next season, by the way. I think there is a balance there for Missouri because in the past, I think they've said, hey, look, we want to play an FBS, Power 5 type team, at least one a year in the out-of-conference seems to be the pattern here. But at the same time, I don't think Missouri exactly wants to go on the road and play Michigan or Oregon or Notre Dame or somebody like that. So there is a balancing act there. At the same time, I definitely see Travis's point. I really do. I don't think certainly a road game against UMass is not doing Missouri any favors this season. That's not a road trip that I or any other Missouri fans that I'm aware of are excited to make, unlike the Boston College trip a few years ago. It's also one of those games that, again, it's a road game, an unnecessary road game that really has no upside for this program. You win the game easily, well, that's what you were supposed to do. God forbid you stumble and lose or maybe just win the game by one score or something like that. Well, then that's legitimately hurts your resume for the 12-team playoffs. So what exactly is the upside for Missouri playing at UMass? Certainly there isn't any for the 2024 season. That's easy to see in retrospect. But even going back to when this game was originally scheduled, what exactly was the upside at the time? What was the administration thinking by scheduling this game? Travis, I don't have a great answer for you. I really don't. And obviously, Missouri softball came up just short of making the College World Series this past weekend. So definitely a bitter pill for that team to swallow a little bit. But I'll just tell you, as somebody who is not a diehard Missouri softball fan, but just a diehard Missouri fan to be sure, I think that team absolutely had a huge victory this past weekend. I really do. I think this entire season was just a huge victory for that program despite their disappointment here. I want to explain why coming up right after these quick words. So before Game 3 of the Super Regional in Columbia, which Missouri ultimately lost in extra innings to Duke 4-3, Missouri coach Larissa Anderson had a very long quote that's been circulated a lot, but I think it's very worth sharing here. She said, "There is nothing better than playing in this atmosphere. It's incredible." And before the game started, I talked to the team in left field after we take line balls, and what I said to them is that you want to look around and start to look down the right field line. I want you to scan the entire stadium. You built this, and this is what we play for, and it's every little girl's dream to play in an atmosphere like this. And we're so unbelievably blessed and thankful that we have the community support and the athletic department support to be able to put a super regional like this, to put on a super regional like this, and they're going to remember these moments for the rest of your life, regardless of the results. They're not going to talk about a strikeout or a base hit or a save. They're going to talk about who they celebrated these moments with. And I totally agree with Larissa Anderson, and to me, that is why this was a huge victory for the softball program, the community, Missouri fans, the whole deal. And I really believe that softball the last few years, with partially because ESPN has really jumped on with coverage of the Women's College World Series, but I think college softball really has an opportunity here because with all the changes in football and men's basketball in particular, with the transfer portal, hey, to some extent, women's basketball too, right? A lot of transfer portal movement in that sport these days as well. But it seems like softball is a little bit different because unlike women's basketball, for example, and certainly men's basketball and football, well, the WNBA gives you an opportunity to continue to play for money. Well, that's not really the case with softball. Just professional softball has never caught on in America. It's just not really an opportunity that exists at this moment in time. So what that means is, yes, the transfer portal, very much available, NIL, all that good stuff, but softball is very much a throwback sport right now, where a lot of these gals have been together this entire time. This is truly a team. You listen to these young ladies talk about each other and how they're basically going to be friends for life and all that good stuff. And again, I know that people still occasionally transfer in softball, just like they occasionally transferred in the past. What I'm saying is this is actually a little bit of a throwback here, a throwback to the values and just the sort of structure, really, the infrastructure of sports, that's sort of how it used to be. So if you're the type of person that said, hey, you know what, I kind of liked when it was just you went to Missouri for the most part, you stayed there for 4 years, good, bad, or indifferent, we all had sort of that common experience, something that has been lost a little bit maybe here, just a little bit in recent years. Not completely, of course. You think about Kobe Brown, for example, probably one of the most beloved Missouri basketball players in recent memory. Big part of that, hey, he stayed for 4 years and had an incredible senior season to cap it all off. So to me, again, I've said this before and I'll say it again. When it comes to marketing, sports and leagues and all that kind of stuff, you take the XFL, the UFL, for example. Well, to me, if you're always going to be compared to the NFL until college football, so you can either be better than the NFL. Well, that's probably not going to happen, right? You can't be better than the NFL. So if you can't be better, then you're probably going to either be viewed as less than the NFL. So what do you have to do? What's your other option? You got to be different than the NFL. I think that's something that spring football has really struggled with over the years. How does it differentiate itself from fall football? Well, to me, softball has that opportunity. It really does. I think it can be different than these other sports. It can appeal to sort of, your old school fan, your local fans, all that good stuff. And certainly Missouri, as Larissa Anderson alluded to there, they've got an incredible environment there. A great stadium where, by the way, there was, upwards of 4,000 people at that venue for the final game, just thousands of people coming through the gates there. The interesting thing is there, if you had 3,800 people in Mizzou Arena, or God forbid, Faurot Field, well, it would feel cavernous, wouldn't it? That would be an embarrassing crowd, and you'd be going, oh, man, where is everybody? That type of deal. But believe me, from my firsthand experience, you go to Mizzou Softball Stadium, it's a packed house in there. It feels like an event, and you're right on top of it. It's a really, really fun thing to see in person. So, again, that's another thing that they can capitalize on there. Another thing that's different than a family-friendly thing you can bring the whole family to for cheap. You don't have to fight tons of traffic, horrible parking, all that good stuff. Again, softball's really got a moment here, and I'm proud of this program for sure. I'm proud of how they fought. I think they made Mizzou and Columbia proud, to be sure. So congratulations to Larissa Anderson, her program, on a great season. I know they just came up just a tiny bit short in the extra innings there. Tigers couldn't get any runs going, obviously, in regular time. Interestingly, I will note this. Larissa Anderson, we'll just talk a little bit about that final game. Of course, Lauren Krings with just an incredible postseason performance by her. She gave up a home run in the ninth inning of extra innings. Larissa Anderson said, fourth time through the lineup. When we were going through the lineup when Jennings was up, I knew this was going to be a tough part getting through the top three. As soon as they hit the home run, it was time to make a change, to change the momentum. It just didn't work in our favor. And to me, this is one of those classic managerial decisions that, I think the spreadsheet crowd statistically would certainly agree with Larissa Anderson there. Hey, fourth time through the lineup. There's no doubt that the more you see a pitcher, this just makes logical sense, but this does show up on the spreadsheet, no doubt. The more you go through the lineup, hey, the better chance the batters have of getting a hit off of said pitcher. Fatigue is obviously a factor there as well. But to me, what doesn't show up on the spreadsheet is having to put in a cold pitcher in that spot. Boy, that's a lot of pressure to put on anybody. So especially when in softball you have a player who just is pitching over and over again, who has basically given up no runs in the game until that home run. I'm not going to personally sit here and say Larissa Anderson did the wrong move. I'm just saying that's one of those classic decisions in baseball or softball that the manager has to deal with. And it just goes to show you that while statistically that was the right move, it's not as simple as just, hey, let's look at the stats and let the spreadsheet run the team. You could certainly question that move. Again, not trying to be critical of Larissa Anderson, just trying to bring up a little talking point here. But anyway, regardless, thanks for joining me as always here on Locked On Mizzou. Apologies for a little bit of an erratic schedule last week. I'll be here with you the rest of the week here. Shows on Thursday and Friday. So until then, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.